The wave that struck the Olympian was a fist of God, hurling the billionaire Arthur Kane against a steel bulkhead. A jagged piece of metal protruded from his chest, the storm-swept deck slick with rain and blood. "Do something," his son, Julian, shrieked at the family physician. Dr. Vance, pale with terror, could only stammer, "He needs a real surgeon. We're in the middle of the ocean." Julian then shoved Maya, the yacht's quiet first aid attendant, aside. "Get towels, you idiot. And stay out of the way." To them, she was just part of the serving staff, a useless girl in a cheap uniform. But as the two men stood paralyzed by their own fear, they didn't see the storm in Maya's eyes, the cold, calculating calm of a warrior awakening. She ignored their screams, knelt beside the dying man, and her whisper cut through the wind, "His lung is collapsed. I have to open his chest." They thought she was just to help. They were about to witness a rescue no hospital would ever dare attempt. Hours earlier, the deck of the Olympian had been a stage for the masters of the universe. The sun was a warm benediction on the gleaming chrome and polished teak. Billionaires in crisp linen shirts laughed as they closed deals that could reshape nations, their voices a low, confident hum against the gentle lapping of the waves. Arthur Kane, a lion of a man with a mane of white hair, was the center of this universe, his presence so powerful it seemed to bend the light around him. His son, Julian, stood at his side, a pale, bored prince in his father's court. And in a small, designated corner, almost perfectly camouflaged by her own quiet insignificance, stood Maya Jenkins. She was by her first aid station, a small table with a neatly organized kit, a silent promise of safety that no one noticed or cared about. Julian, walking by with a glass of champagne, had accidentally dropped a cocktail napkin. He hadn't bothered to pick it up. He'd simply paused, looked at Maya, and gestured to the napkin on the deck with a flick of his wrist. A silent, clear command. Maya, her face impassive, had bent down, picked it up, and disposed of it. She was staff. That was her function. Now, the stage was a scene of pure chaos. The gentle lapping of the waves had become a furious, concussive assault. The yacht pitched and rolled violently, a toy in the hands of a furious sea. The air was a screaming torrent of wind and saltwater spray. And Arthur Kane, the lion, lay on the deck, his life bubbling away from a ghastly hole in his chest, his breathing a wet, sickening, gurgling sound. Julian and Dr. Vance stared at Maya, their faces masks of horror and disbelief, as if her quiet, and sane words were more terrifying than the storm itself. "Open his chest?" Julian shrieked, his voice thin and shrill against the roar of the wind. "Are you out of your mind? You're a first aid girl. Your job is to hand out bandages for paper cuts, not talk about splitting my father's ribs open." Dr. Vance, the esteemed Beverly Hills physician, was trembling, his expensive suit soaked, his face a ghastly shade of green. "She's right, you're insane," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "That is a sucking chest wound with a developing tension pneumothorax. To attempt an emergency thoracotomy, here, on a wet, moving deck, in a hurricane, with no anesthesia, no sterile instruments, no support staff. It's not surgery. It's aggravated assault. It's butchery. You'll kill him." He was a man defined by controlled, perfect conditions, and in their absence, he was nothing but a terrified voice listing all the reasons he was useless. Maya didn't hear them. Their hysteria was a distant, irrelevant noise. Her mind, honed by years of training she kept hidden, was already working. She ripped open Arthur Kane's blood-soaked shirt, her fingers expertly probing the edges of the wound. The diagnosis was instantaneous and certain. She saw the telltale frothing of blood with each failed, ragged breath. She saw the alarming distension of the veins in his neck, a sign of the catastrophic pressure building in his chest. She saw the cyanotic, bluish tinge of his lips. Her brain was a calm, cold checklist in the middle of the storm. Assess. Diagnose. Plan. Act. Julian, seeing her touch his father, was jolted from his shock into a fresh wave of rage. He lunged forward and grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. I told you to get towels, he snarled, trying to pull her away from the body. My father is Arthur Kane. Do you have any idea who he is? I'm not going to let some nobody in a cheap polo shirt who probably makes minimum wage cut him open like a damn fish. Maya, without looking at him, yanked her arm free with a sharp, explosive movement that shocked him with its strength. Her voice, when she spoke, was flat, cold, and stripped of all emotion. It was the voice of a machine built for one purpose, saving a life. Your father has a tension pneumothorax, she stated, her words cutting through the wind. A piece of metal has punctured his lung. The hole is acting like a one-way valve. With every breath he takes, air is forced into his chest cavity, but it can't get out. That air is collapsing his lung, and now it's crushing his heart and his other lung against his spine. In approximately 3 minutes, his heart will stop. The helicopter you're waiting for cannot fly in this weather. Even if it could, it would be an hour too late. I am his only chance of surviving the next 5 minutes. Her clinical, brutal assessment hung in the air, a fact as hard and real as the steel deck beneath them. They were stunned into silence. This was not the language of a first aid attendant. Dr. Vance was the first to find his voice. How could you possibly know that? He stammered. What are your qualifications? Julian recovered, his fear curdling back into its default state of arrogant contempt. She doesn't know anything, he spat, pointing a trembling finger at Maya. She probably saw it on some medical drama on television. He turned his full, sneering attention on her, his face a mask of disgust. What did you do? Get your nursing certificate from a community college? Do you even have a degree? You have no right. You have no right to touch him. Julian's sneering question hung in the air, a final, pathetic attempt to enforce a social order that the storm had already ripped to shreds. As the word right left his lips, his father's body gave the horrifying answer. Arthur Kane's back arched violently off the deck, a single, spastic convulsion. A terrible, liquid, gurgling sound rattled in his throat, and his eyes, which had been half-lidded, rolled back into his head. Dr. Vance, seeing the final, agonal gasps, took a stumbling step backward. That's it, he whispered, his voice a ghost in the wind. Pulmonary arrest. It's over. The sight and sound of his father's death rattle shattered Julian's arrogance, leaving only raw, primal terror. He was no longer a prince, he was just a boy watching his father die. But that sound, the sound of an ending, was a starting gun for Maya. With a surge of pure adrenaline, she shoved past the stunned Julian with a force that sent him sprawling onto the wet deck. Her quiet, servile demeanor had been completely burned away, leaving behind a core of hard, unyielding command. I need a knife, she roared, her voice a shocking crack of thunder that seemed to challenge the storm itself. A sharp, clean knife. And I need vodka or whiskey. The highest proof you can find. Now. Her command was so absolute, so primal, that it bypassed reason. One of the other billionaire guests, a tech mogul who had built an empire by recognizing and obeying genius-level authority, simply reacted. He turned and sprinted, slipping and sliding on the wet deck, back toward the yacht's main salon and its fully stocked galley. The bizarre request jolted Dr. Vance back to some semblance of his professional self. A kitchen knife? Alcohol, he shrieked, his voice hysterical. Are you insane? You can't perform a medical procedure with dining utensils. You'll introduce a massive infection. You'll sever an intercostal artery. It's barbaric. Julian scrambled back to his feet, his face a mask of grief and fury. He planted himself between Maya and his dying father, his arms spread wide. I forbid it, he screamed. I am his son. I am his legal next of kin. And I am ordering you, I am forbidding you, to touch him with a filthy kitchen knife. Maya stopped. She looked at Julian, her face unreadable in the stormy twilight. The quiet girl he had ordered to pick up a napkin was gone. In her place was someone he had never seen before, someone ancient and terrifying. Your father's heart is about to stop beating, she said, her voice like ice. He is drowning in his own blood while the air in his chest crushes him from the inside. The man you know is already gone. You have a simple choice. She took a step closer, forcing him to look into her eyes. You can stand there and forbid me from trying, guaranteeing that he dies right now. Or you can get out of my way and give me the slimmest chance of bringing him back. She then shifted her gaze to Dr. Vance, her eyes pinning him in place. And you, Doctor. You can either assist me, or you can start preparing your official statement for the Medical Board of Inquiry. The one where you explain why a licensed physician stood by and did nothing while a man died from a survivable traumatic injury. Your choice. Her words were a brutal, tactical strike, hitting both men in their most vulnerable spots, Julian's love for his father, and Vance's terror of litigation and professional ruin. Just then, the tech mogul returned, his hands shaking. He held a gleaming, 10-inch chef's knife from the yacht's galley and a bottle of expensive Russian vodka. Maya took them without a word of thanks. Julian looked at the fearsome knife. He looked at Maya's face, at the absolute, terrifying certainty he saw there. And he broke. He took a single, stumbling step backward, effectively surrendering the field. His voice, when he spoke, was a hoarse, hate-filled whisper. Fine. Do it. Perform your savage butchery. He raised a trembling, accusing finger. But I am a witness. Dr. Vance is a witness. Every person on this deck is a witness. And when he is dead, I will use every dollar my father ever made to see you rot in a prison cell for the rest of your life for murder. The threat was absolute. Her life for his. Maya didn't even seem to hear him. She already had what she needed. She knelt beside Arthur Kane, the storm raging around her like a biblical apocalypse. She uncorked the vodka bottle with her teeth, spitting the cork onto the deck. She poured the clear, strong liquid liberally over the gleaming knife and over the wound in Arthur's chest. The makeshift antiseptic steamed and hissed in the cold rain. She took the handle of the chef's knife in her right hand. She placed the fingers of her left hand on Arthur Kane's chest, feeling for the space between the fourth and fifth ribs. The yacht lurched violently on a massive wave, and she moved with it, a perfect, fluid gyroscope, the deadly tip of the knife never wavering from its target. She looked up one last time, her eyes locking with Julian's. There was no fear in her expression. There was no doubt. There was only the cold, hard, chilling focus of a soldier on the battlefield. The line had been crossed. The rules were gone. There was only the storm, the dying man, and the knife. With a kitchen knife as her scalpel and a billionaire's life in her hands, Maya is about to cross a line from which there is no return. The storm outside is nothing compared to the one she's about to unleash. This is a story about doing what is necessary, not what is safe. It's about the warrior that lives inside the quietest people. If you believe in that kind of raw, untamed courage, the kind that gets the job done when everyone else has given up, then this community is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now, and let's ride out this storm together. The world narrowed to the point of the knife. The hurricane howled, the yacht groaned as it was thrown by another monstrous wave, but in the small, violent bubble of the emergency, there was an unnatural calm. It was the calm inside Maya's mind. She moved with the lurching of the ship, her legs braced, her core a solid, unmoving anchor. Her past and present collided. The quiet, invisible first aid girl was gone, and the combat medic had taken her place. She pressed the knife down. Julian let out a strangled, horrified gasp as the keen edge of the chef's knife sliced through his father's skin and muscle. Dr. Vance made a retching sound, turning his head away, unable to watch the sacrilege. To them, this was a moment of pure, savage butchery. A desecration. But Maya's hands were not the hands of a butcher. They were the hands of a master craftsman forced to work with crude tools. The incision was swift, precise, and perfectly placed in the fifth intercostal space, exactly where her training had taught her to go. It was a movement born of muscle memory, practiced 1,000 times in the blood and dust of forgotten battlefields. She didn't hesitate. Hesitation was a luxury that cost lives. "Oh my God, she's actually done it," Julian whispered, his voice trembling. He couldn't look away now, his horror mixed with a morbid, paralyzing fascination. "She's going to sever the subclavian artery," Dr. Vance muttered, his eyes squeezed shut as if reciting a prayer of doom. "She'll puncture the pericardium." Even if he survives this, a massive, untreatable infection is now a certainty. This is a death sentence. He was narrating the failure he was so certain was happening, absolving himself of any responsibility. Maya ignored them. She was in the zone, a state of hyperfocus where the only things that existed were the patient and the mission. She used her fingers to bluntly dissect the muscle layers, hooking them under the rib cage to spread the opening, a brutal but effective technique when proper rib spreaders weren't available. The storm was a constant, violent enemy. A massive wave slammed against the hull, sending a sheet of icy water across the deck. She shielded the open wound with her body, bracing herself with one hand while her other remained impossibly steady, her fingers deep inside the dying billionaire's chest. Her goal wasn't the heart, not yet. Her goal was the air. The invisible killer. The tension pneumothorax was a bomb of compressed air inside her patient's chest, and she had to disarm it. Her fingertips, astonishingly sensitive, palpated the anatomy in the darkness of the wound. She could feel the taut, bulging surface of the parietal pleura, the membrane that contained the trapped air, stretched to a drum-like tightness. It was pushing everything aside, crushing the life out of Arthur Kane. She repositioned the knife, changing her grip, holding it like a dart. She now needed only the very tip, a single point to lance the balloon. Julian saw the movement and his voice rose to a scream. "She's going to stab his heart." Maya took a deep, steadying breath, her own rhythm a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm. She braced herself for the next roll of the ship. She timed it perfectly. As the yacht reached the peak of a wave and hung for a split second in a moment of zero gravity, she made her move. A single, sharp, decisive puncture. For one agonizing second, there was nothing but the shriek of the wind and the horrified gasps of the onlookers. Julian began to whisper, a look of grim, tragic vindication on his face. "You've killed him. You've actually killed him." And then came the sound. It was a sound that cut through the roar of the hurricane. A loud, distinct, and utterly unmistakable hissssssssssss. It was the sound of a high-pressure tire being violently punctured. It was the sound of a cubic foot of trapped, deadly air, which had been crushing Arthur Kane's heart and lungs, escaping its prison and venting furiously into the storm. Dr. Harrison Vance's head snapped up. His eyes, which had been squeezed shut in terror, flew open. As a physician, he knew exactly what that sound meant. It was the sound of a successful needle decompression. It was the sound of a correct diagnosis. It was the first, shocking, undeniable proof that this quiet, insane girl in the cheap polo shirt was not, in fact, a murderer. She was a savior. And her barbaric butchery was the most brilliant act of medicine he had ever witnessed. The violent hiss of escaping air went on for what felt like an eternity, a sound of pure, physical release that defied the storm. Arthur Kane's body, which had been rigid with the strain of suffocation, seemed to deflate, relaxing onto the hard deck. The terrifying, bluish tint of his lips and fingernails began to recede, replaced by a pale, corpse-like gray. It was a ghastly improvement, but it was an improvement. The immediate threat of the air pressure bomb was gone. Dr. Vance stared, his mind, conditioned by years of textbook medicine and sterile environments, struggling to process the raw, primitive reality of what had just happened. "My God," he whispered, the words swallowed by the wind. She was right. The terror in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, a horrified, clinical respect. The pampered physician was stripped away, and for the first time that night, the doctor re-emerged. He looked at the gaping wound, then at Maya, his voice no longer an accusation, but a question from one professional to another. "The pericardial tamponade is relieved," he said, his medical vocabulary returning. "But the trauma, the heart will have gone into arrest from the pressure. You've bought him a minute, maybe less. What's your plan?" He was asking her. The world had been turned completely upside down. Julian remained on his knees on the deck, staring at the scene, speechless. The rigid certainties of his life, that money buys the best, that titles equal authority, that servants are invisible, had been shattered. He was watching a quiet girl in a cheap polo shirt command a storm, and his father's life, with a bloody kitchen knife. His entire universe had ceased to make sense. Maya knew the next step was even more dangerous. His heart is fibrillating. There's no organized rhythm, she said, her fingers still deep inside the wound, feeling for the weak, chaotic fluttering. I need to do an internal cardiac massage. Vance's eyes went wide. Without a defibrillator? Manually? But first, Maya continued, ignoring his shock, the shard of metal. It's acting as a plug. The moment I pull it out, he'll hemorrhage and bleed out in 20 seconds unless I can locate and clamp the source of the bleeding. I can't see anything in here. She looked up at Vance, her eyes boring into his. I need you to irrigate. Find the cleanest water on this boat. Bottled mineral water. And bring more vodka. We need to see. Galvanized, his fear now channeled into a desperate need to act, Dr. Vance scrambled to his feet. On it, he said, and ran, slipping on the wet deck, toward the salon, a man with a new and terrifying purpose. The moment he was gone, the new crisis hit. Arthur Kane's body, which had relaxed, suddenly went completely limp. The chaotic fluttering beneath Maya's fingers stopped. His eyes, which had been half open, became fixed and glassy. He's gone. Julian sobbed, crawling closer. He stopped. Maya didn't need to check for a pulse. She could feel the life extinguish. The heart in his chest was now just a lump of cold, still meat. No pulse, she confirmed, her voice grim. He's in full cardiac arrest. Just then, Vance returned, clutching 2 large bottles of Fiji water and another of vodka. Here, he yelled. There was no more time. The final, desperate, impossible gamble was here. Pour, Maya commanded, her voice a whipcrack. As Vance knelt and poured a stream of clean water into the horrific wound, flushing away the dark, pooling blood, Maya took a deep breath and did the unthinkable. She pushed her hand deeper into the open chest cavity, her fingers navigating past the sharp, broken edge of a rib. She bypassed the collapsed lung. She reached into the very center of his being. And her hand closed around Arthur Kane's silent, unmoving heart. The act was so primal, so intimate, so far beyond the boundaries of modern medicine that it felt like a dream. Vance watched, his mouth agape, the water bottle slipping from his fingers. Julian let out a low, mournful sob. The storm raged around them, a chorus for this final, desperate act of creation. Maya began to squeeze. It was a steady, rhythmic compression. 1, 2, 3, 4. She was the machine now. She was the defibrillator. She was the life force, manually pushing blood from the silent ventricles into the dying man's body. It was a brutal, exhausting, and incredibly skillful act, a dance of life and death performed with her bare hand at the center of a storm. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. Then, under her palm, she felt it. A flutter. A weak, disorganized, chaotic fibrillation. A spark. Come on, she whispered, her words a prayer spoken directly to the heart in her hand. Beat for me. Come on. She continued the compressions, her rhythm unwavering, trying to coax the spasming muscle back into a coherent rhythm. Another flutter, this one stronger, more defined. And then, it happened. The heart, as if responding to her touch, to her will, gave a single, powerful, independent thump. It kicked against her fingers with the force of a trapped bird. It was alive. The single, powerful thump against Maya's hand was a declaration of war against death itself. It was followed by another, weaker beat, then a pause. The heart was fighting, a sputtering, disorganized engine trying to restart. I have a pulse. Dr. Vance yelled, his fingers pressed desperately against Arthur Kane's carotid artery. His voice was a raw cry of disbelief and hope. It's thready, highly irregular, ventricular tachycardia, maybe, but it's there. He looked at Maya, his face illuminated by a flash of lightning, all pretense of superiority gone. He was no longer her antagonist, he was her resident. The shard, he said, understanding the new, terrible calculus of the situation. It must be irritating the pericardium. It has to come out, or the arrhythmia will send him back into full arrest. He won't survive another one. Maya knew. The moment I pull it, the pulmonary artery will hemorrhage, she said, her voice a low, grim statement of fact. I'll have less than 10 seconds to find the tear and clamp it before he bleeds out. She locked eyes with Vance, a silent contract passing between them in the heart of the storm. You are my monitor. You are my eyes. The second his pulse even flickers, you scream it. Vance just nodded, his face a grim mask of resolve. I need hemostats. Maya yelled, not taking her eyes off the wound. She scrambled for her battered, overstuffed first aid kit, tearing it open. She bypassed the neat rolls of bandages and antiseptic wipes, her hand diving deep and pulling out a set of large, sterile Kelly hemostats. There were tools for clamping a severed artery in a limb, laughably crude and oversized for the delicate work of cardiothoracic surgery. They were clumsy, they were brutal, but they were all she had. She took a deep breath, the cold, salty air burning her lungs. The wind howled a final, furious crescendo. Okay, she said, her voice a strange, calm island in the chaos. On 3. 1, 2. The yacht was lifted by a colossal wave, hanging in the air for an impossible second. 3. With a single, smooth, powerful pull, she extracted the jagged, 6-inch shard of metal from Arthur Kane's chest. For a moment, she held the bloody piece of evidence in her hand, the cause of all this chaos. And then the hemorrhage began. It wasn't a bleed, it was a deluge. A torrent of dark, venous blood erupted from the wound, a horrifying, unstoppable flood that instantly obscured everything. Pulse is gone. Vance screamed, his voice breaking with a sob of despair. We're losing him. He's gone. Maya didn't hesitate. She dropped the shard and plunged her hand, now armed with the hemostats, back into the blind, bloody torrent. She couldn't see a thing. The delicate anatomical map she had felt with her fingers was now just a chaotic, swirling void of hot blood. She had to rely on memory, on the ghost of a feeling, on the ghost of a chance. Her fingers searched frantically, desperately, for the source of the gushing flow. 5 seconds. 6. The man was emptying onto the deck. And then her fingers found it. The ragged, torn edge of the pulmonary artery. A horrifying, gaping hole where the shard had been. With her other hand, she guided the clumsy hemostats down, her fingers acting as a living, feeling rail. She opened the jaws, found the vessel by touch alone, and clamped down with all her strength. The gushing torrent of blood slowed, became a trickle, and then stopped. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing. Just the sound of the rain and Julian Kane's quiet, heartbroken sobs. Then, Vance's voice, a raw, incredulous roar. Pulse is back. It's back. He let out a wild, unhinged laugh that was half sob. It's strong. It's... My God, Maya, it's a steady, sinus rhythm. He looked up at the black, churning sky, rain and tears mixing on his face. He's back. He is actually, truly back. The patient was stable. The bleed was stopped. The heart was beating. The danger, the immediate, screaming, life or death danger, was over. And as if the world itself was acknowledging the feat, the hurricane seemed to exhale. The shriek of the wind lessened to a mournful howl. The violent, horizontal rain softened to a steady, vertical downpour. The storm had broken. Maya, her mission complete, finally allowed the exhaustion to hit her. She slumped back against a railing, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her arms, her front, her face, all of it was soaked in a mixture of salt water and Arthur Kane's blood. The bloody chef's knife lay on the deck beside her, a primitive totem of a battle that had been won. Julian Kane slowly, shakily, got to his feet. He looked at his father, at the steady, life-giving rise and fall of his chest. He looked at the bloody knife on the deck. And then he looked at Maya. He walked over to his father. He took off his own multi-$1,000 cashmere coat, now ruined, and gently, almost clumsily, draped it over his father's shivering form. It was the most profound act of care he had ever performed. Then he turned and stood before Maya. The arrogant prince, the master of the universe in waiting, simply stood and stared at the quiet, blood-soaked girl. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. There were no words for this. There was only the raw, humbling, and life-altering awe of a man who had just witnessed an impossible miracle. The first light of dawn broke through the bruised, retreating clouds, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and rose. The storm had passed, leaving a battered but blessedly stable world in its wake. The deck of the Olympian was a scene of controlled chaos and quiet reverence. Arthur Kane lay still, his breathing shallow but steady, covered by his son's ruined cashmere coat and a pile of blankets sourced from the yacht's luxurious staterooms. He was alive. For the past 3 hours, a new and unspoken hierarchy had ruled the battered vessel. At its center was Maya. Exhausted, bloodstained, and running on pure adrenaline, she was the undisputed commander. Her quiet orders were obeyed without question. "Julian, check his pupils for me again," she'd say, and the billionaire heir, his face stripped of all its former arrogance, would kneel and gently perform the task, reporting his findings with the humble diligence of a first-year medical student. "Dr. Vance, we need to keep his core temperature from dropping. We need to rig a saline drip to keep him hydrated," she'd command, and the once panicked physician would work with a desperate, focused energy, using his encyclopedic knowledge as a tool at her disposal. The other guests, billionaires and titans of industry who had spent the night hiding in the salon, had slowly emerged. They saw the blood on the deck, the gleaming chef's knife now sitting in a sterile pan of vodka, and the quiet, exhausted girl who was now giving orders to the son of the man she had just saved. They said nothing. They simply watched, their own immense power rendered meaningless in the face of her raw, undeniable competence. They were witnessing a shift in the very nature of power, and it left them stunned into a respectful silence. During a quiet lull, as Dr. Vance was monitoring the makeshift four, Julian approached Maya. She was sitting on an overturned crate, cleaning the blood from her hands with a sterile wipe. He stood before her, a young man completely undone, his world remade. He began, his voice rough and hesitant. "I don't understand. How did you? Who are you?" Maya looked up from her hands. Her eyes were impossibly weary, but clear. There was no anger in them, no hint of "I told you so." "I'm a nurse," she said simply. "No," Julian insisted, shaking his head. "No nurse on earth could do what you just did. That wasn't a procedure. That was a battle." Maya paused, considering her answer. She looked out at the calming sea. "I was a combat medic with the Special Operations Command," she said, her voice quiet and flat. "I learned how to save lives in places where there were no sterile fields, no machines, and no rules. Just a patient, a problem, and whatever you could find in the dirt to fix it." The simple, unadorned statement landed with the force of a physical blow. Julian stared at her, finally understanding the source of the cold, hard calm he had seen in her eyes. It was the calm of a warrior. All he could do was nod, a gesture of profound, humbling respect. The conversation was cut short by a new sound, a rhythmic thump-thump-thump that grew steadily louder from the horizon. A state-of-the-art Coast Guard medevac helicopter appeared, a beautiful, modern angel of mercy descending from the heavens. The real world was coming to reclaim them. The helicopter hovered expertly over the deck, and a team of 4 highly professional flight medics rappelled down with practiced ease. They moved with the confident, brisk efficiency of professionals who had seen everything. Their leader, a grizzled, broad-shouldered man with O'Connell stitched on his vest, took in the scene at a glance: the billionaire patient, the makeshift setup, the bloody kitchen knife. His eyes narrowed. He knelt by Arthur Kane, his team already hooking up portable monitors, their voices a calm, professional staccato of medical jargon. BP is low but stable. Heart rhythm is regular. Patient is unconscious but responsive to pain. O'Connell stood up, his gaze sweeping over the small group before landing, with laser-like intensity, on Maya. He recognized the look in her eyes, the look of the person who had been in charge. "I'm lead medic O'Connell," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "And you are?" "Maya Jenkins," she replied, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I'm the first aid attendant for the vessel." O'Connell's eyes flicked to the chef's knife, then back to her face. His expression was unreadable, a mask of professional skepticism. He had just rappelled onto a billion-dollar yacht to find a world-famous CEO with his chest crudely cracked open, being attended to by a girl who called herself a first aid attendant. "All right, Maya Jenkins," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You're going to walk me through, step by step, exactly what kind of unsanctioned, reckless butchery you decided to perform on this man. And this had better be good." The word hung in the air, butchery. The same accusation Dr. Vance had hurled at her, but this time it came not from a panicked coward, but from a legitimate, experienced medical authority. Maya's ordeal wasn't over. It had just entered a new, and perhaps even more dangerous, phase. The lead medic's accusation, the word butchery, hung in the salty air, a judgment from the world of rules and regulations. For a moment, it seemed Maya would have to fight her battle all over again, this time against the very system she represented. But before she could draw a breath to defend herself, an unexpected ally stepped forward. "You are wrong," Julian Kane said. His voice was quiet but carried an unshakable, newfound authority. He stood between O'Connell and Maya, a human shield of conviction. "You were not here." "I was. I saw everything." He looked at the medic, his gaze unflinching. What she did was not butchery. It was a miracle. She was the only person on this ship with the courage and the skill to act while the rest of us, myself included, stood by and watched my father die. She is the only reason he is still alive. Then, a second voice joined him. Dr. Vance stepped forward, his face pale but his voice steady. "He's right," he said, addressing O'Connell as a professional colleague. "I am a physician. And I can tell you that by every textbook, by every medical standard I have ever learned, that man on that gurney should be dead." Her diagnosis of a tension pneumothorax in the field was perfect. Her execution of an emergency thoracotomy under these impossible conditions was beyond anything I have ever witnessed in my 30-year career. O'Connell was stunned into silence. He looked from the fierce, protective stance of the billionaire's son to the sincere, professional testimony of the doctor. This was not the story he had expected. He turned his gaze back to Maya, his expression shifting from skepticism to intense curiosity. "Explain," he said, his tone no longer an accusation, but a demand for information. Maya gave her report. Her voice was flat, tired, and devoid of drama, the methodical tone of a soldier debriefing a mission. Patient presented with a penetrating chest trauma from a shrapnel object, resulting in a tension pneumothorax and subsequent pericardial tamponade, leading to cardiac arrest. An emergency thoracotomy was performed at the 5th intercostal space to release intrathoracic pressure. This was followed by internal cardiac massage to restore a viable rhythm. The penetrating object was then removed, and the resulting hemorrhage from the pulmonary artery was controlled with a Kelly hemostat. O'Connell listened, his eyes never leaving her face. He had heard reports like this before, but they had come from surgeons in a military field hospital, not from a first aid attendant on a luxury yacht. He knelt one last time beside Arthur Kane, who was now being loaded onto a stretcher. He looked at the clean, deliberate lines of the incision, the precise, life-saving placement of the clamp. He looked at the pathetic, improvised tools nearby, the chef's knife, the vodka bottle. He stood up slowly and looked at Maya, his expression finally breaking into one of deep, profound, professional respect. "Combat medic?" he asked quietly. Maya simply nodded. O'Connell let out a long, slow whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. Jesus Christ, kid, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. You shouldn't be a first aid attendant on a yacht. You should be in a level 1 trauma center, teaching surgeons how it's done. 6 months later, Arthur Kane, looking healthy and vibrant, stood at a podium in a crowded press conference. The massive logo behind him read, "The Jenkins Initiative." 6 months ago, he said, his voice ringing with emotion, I was given a second chance at life, not in a pristine hospital, but on the deck of a ship in a storm, by a woman with more courage and skill than any 10 surgeons. My son Julian, he said, gesturing to the young man standing beside him, no longer a bored prince but a focused and humble director, will now be leading this multi-billion-dollar foundation. Its sole purpose is to fund, train, and deploy teams of former combat medics and other veterans to disaster zones around the world, places where the rules don't apply, and the only thing that matters is getting the job done. On a large screen behind them, a video feed patched in. It was Dr. Vance, looking tired but fulfilled, standing in a dusty, makeshift field hospital in the aftermath of an earthquake. The first Jenkins Initiative team arrived this morning, he reported with a smile. And I can tell you, the world is already a better, safer place. The final scene is not in a boardroom or a press conference. It's in a large, clean, and practical training facility in a quiet town. Maya, in her familiar polo shirt and cargo pants, is teaching a class of a dozen veterans. They are gathered around a highly advanced trauma dummy, practicing the very procedures she performed on that stormy night. The books will tell you to wait for the perfect conditions, she says, her voice calm and steady. They'll tell you to wait for the right tools, the right team, the right light. She looks around at the faces of the men and women in front of her, soldiers like her, who had seen the world at its worst. But out there are no perfect conditions. There is only the patient. There is only the mission. And there is only the warrior inside of you, ready to do what is necessary. She hadn't accepted a blank check or a fancy title. She had simply asked for the tools to build an army of heroes, an army in her own image. Her victory was not in the reward she was given, but in the legacy she was now building. Maya's incredible story proves that the most capable person in the room isn't always the one with the fanciest title or the most expensive suit. True heroes are defined not by their job description, but by their courage to act when everyone else is frozen in fear. It's a powerful reminder that there are warriors walking among us in the quietest of uniforms. We all have parts of our past and hidden skills that might surprise the people we know today. What is a skill you have from a past life, a previous job, a unique hobby, or a forgotten experience that most people don't know you possess? Share your story in the comments below. Let's celebrate the hidden heroes and the unexpected skills we all carry within us. If you believe in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things, make sure you hit that subscribe button to join our community. Thank you for watching.